we miss the miracles. We miss the small miracles that are every day all around, the beauty that is already there. So many people are focused on how bad their life is. What if we begin to look?
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. In this episode, I talk with Winfield Bevins about beauty and why it matters in real life. We talk about his book, How Beauty Will Save the World, and the idea that beauty is not extra or optional, but essential to how we live, to how we work, and pay attention. Winfield shares his own story and how arts and creativity shaped his faith, his vocation, and the direction of his life. We talk about burnout, speed, and the ways we lose ourselves when everything becomes efficient and functional. We explore how beauty helps us slow down, become present, and recover a sense of meaning. We also talk about creativity beyond the arts, what it means to make a life that reflects care and intention, and how beauty shows up in ordinary work, relationships, and communities. We also talk about the church's relationship to the arts and how that relationship has been lost or neglected over time. We discuss what it looks like for churches to reimagine their spaces, their practices, and their engagement with culture through beauty. Winfield explains how art opens people to presence and attention and meaning, and why things matter for spiritual formation and mission. This is a conversation about renewal and attention. It's about learning to see again. It's about bringing beauty into a world that often feels fractured and exhausted, and choosing to live in a way that points toward hope. So join us. Here is my conversation with Winfield Bevins. Winfield, welcome to Shifting Culture. Excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk today about how beauty will save the world and your venture of like bringing the arts and church and mission and the beauty of God into the world. When you talk about beauty, what are you thinking? What is beauty, and how do you think beauty will save the world?
That's kind of the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? Like, beauty's notoriously hard to define, so you talk to a million people, they're going to give you different answers. I think ultimately beauty, true beauty, points to the one who is beautiful, good, and true, which is Jesus Christ, the triune Godhead. God the Father is the creator, the great artist of everything that is beautiful that we see in the world. And we are created as co-creators to join in that mission that God originally created the world out of, which is beauty. And beauty, just really simply, I think beauty gives us glimmers of the beauty of God. It points us toward the transcendence and towards something else that we're longing for that we might not even know what it is, which ultimately is God. So I did say it was notoriously hard to define. So I know I threw a bunch of terms and things in there, but yeah.
That's perfect. In your book, you said that beauty saved your life twice. How did beauty save your life? What
Yeah.
was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, really, again, that's kind of a little tongue in cheek, but yeah, I mean, the Lord has used beauty on numerous occasions to save me and is still saving me. Just in a real practical example, when I was a teenager, got mixed up and ended up going to an alternative school, got kicked out of school and went to an alternative school and had a high school art teacher who was a professor at the University of Tennessee taught me how to paint. And it was art, it was beauty, it was creating that gave me hope and healing and pointed me to the light. And ultimately, I came to faith at 19. And I look back on that experience, I think it wasn't art that saved me. It wasn't beauty necessarily that saved me, but it was the power of the arts that pointed me toward the one who did save me, which is Jesus Christ. And I think that's what the arts have the power to do, to point us beyond ourselves to the one who is beautiful. More recently, a few years ago, I had led a big program at one of the world's largest seminaries, was traveling the world, was kind of doing all this stuff, and kind of hit a wall, hit burnout, if you will. And I had this experience. I got COVID. I talk about it in the book, but I was laying in bed and you know had the long COVID where brain fog, all this stuff, and this piano concerto came on, and it was like I heard the music for the first time in my life. And the Lord used this secular piano, contemporary piano song called Bluebird, and it was like the Lord just used this to kind of reorient me to being present, to his presence in and through all things, in my own family, in my home, and God really used that to kind of reorient my life around slowing down, to be present, to look, to listen, and to see the beauty that's all around us. And so those are just two examples of how beauty has saved me and really is saving me still.
As you look back on your life, you've had different vocations, purpose in your life as a church planter, church leader like church multiplication, leader at seminary. You're doing this arts ministry at the moment.
Yep.
How has beauty actually then shaped some of your purpose all throughout, even in
Absolutely.
a
Yep.
different vocation that you've had?
That's a great question. And again, it's not like, I think some people when I left the seminary to kind of start Creo Arts as a nonprofit arts organization, in many ways, everything I've ever done has brought me to this moment. And it's a convergence rather than, Winfield having a midlife crisis. This actually is the fulfillment of who God has created me to be. So I've, planted churches, I've created networks, I've worked with church leaders around the world to create innovative strategic programs that have planted thousands of churches around the world. And all of that has come out of a place of creativity and innovation and really out of a heart of an artist. So I like to kind of describe myself, this isn't on my official bio, but as an apostolic artist. I think everything the Lord has ever done in and through me has had this apostolic missional outward thrust to help the church and Christians engage culture, context, but in a way that thinks innovatively and creatively. And I'm dreaming up my next book is gonna be Lead Like an Artist. Like, how do we help leaders and church leaders think like an artist and creatively and see the world and mission through the eyes of a child? I think this is the type of stuff that, Jesus's ministry was highly creative and
I mean, that's beautiful for you to be able to see the thread of beauty in different vocations, and in church life. The church that I'm a part of, our name is Nava, which means bring home and make beautiful. It
Mm,
is the mission that God has given us. He gave us the name. We changed our name to this because he specifically said, "This is who you are." The mission is to beautify the world through Christ.
yes.
And so what do you think that looks like with a church? Like, I mean, a lot of people could think about the arts and creativity and, we know that side, but how do we merge that into church life and what we're doing with the church?
Yeah, I love that, and, I'd love to have a side conversation about that. So, a lot of what we're really doing with Creo Arts is on one level, we're supporting Christian artists, we're helping to commission, come alongside artists, but we're working with building bridges and partnering with artists, patrons, and churches in local communities to bring the power of the arts to communities to, again, point people to the one who's beautiful, good, and true, to bring beauty to the world in all of its expressions. And one of the sub themes of the book is this is not a book, it is a book for artists, but it's actually not a book for artists. It's a book for the rest of us. It's a book for pastors. It's a book for lawyers. It's a book for stay at home moms who are, breastfeeding or raising, children. And like, how can you make whatever you do beautiful? How can you bring beauty to whatever your vocation is, whatever community you're in? How, more specifically, how can you make your life a work of art? And I think these are the type of things that the church is led with the truth, which, yes, we need the truth, But there's this historic understanding of beauty, goodness, and truth as the three transcendentals. And so what if we led with beauty? What if the church was known as a place of beauty and reflection of glory through everything that we did, that opened people's hearts and minds to the truth? And I think in the times in which we're living is so much of how the church has led in culture has been in a way that is not beautiful, in a way that engages arguments or, getting caught up in, political divisions. And I think we begin with beauty because it opens people's hearts, minds, and imaginations to the truth and the goodness of God. It's not an either or. This isn't watering down the gospel. It's actually preparing people's hearts for that. And so, one example, I share a lot of examples through the book of non-artists that are kind of thinking this way of creatively engaging their cultures. One is a young man who, I tell the book is full of stories. So one example is a young artist who's working with his dad in a small town in Arkansas. They bought like an old hardware store that was been dilapidated. It's a tiny little town, and they've just turned this into like a community arts center where they're just, they're making leather works and they're putting people to work. And it's this creative way of trying to engage their community with beauty. And, this young man was a student at Asbury and was really one of our artists. And he actually introduced me to the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, which is repair the world, which is another way of kind of like the name of your church is like, hey, we want to make the world beautiful. And that might look different in different ways, but how can we repair and bring beauty to broken places? That's really what we're talking about is, not art for art's sake. We're talking about bringing beauty, whether it's feeding the homeless, whether it's uplifting people's hearts and minds in communities that wouldn't necessarily think in a way that's artistic, to maybe coming alongside pastors and church leaders to think outside of old paradigms and to begin to see the world in living color as opposed to black and white.
Your book opens with the story of the Bosnian cellist who
Yes.
played amid the ruins of war. Like, why that story to get us going, and what does that tell us about the power of beauty in the face of brokenness that you've just been talking about?
Yeah, when I first heard about that story, I was just so compelled and whether or not he was a Christian, I don't think really matters. Here in the midst of war and atrocities and unbelievable ugliness. Here's this professional cellist that in the midst of bombs flying and bullets, shooting back and forth, shows up in the middle of the rubble in his black tuxedo and begins to just play the cello in the midst of war. And people were stunned. The bullets stopped flying. People like laid down their guns and were like, what is going on here? And he would just do this random, people didn't know where he was gonna show up, and throughout the war, he would just show up and just begin to play and bring beauty to this ugly, horrible mess. And what an inspiration for the rest of us. So imagine if Christians put their lives on the line to bring hope, healing, beauty to the rubble of the world in which we live in. And so many times it's kind of like, you know, so many Christians are like doomsday thinkers, and I don't know, no man knows the time or the hour, the Bible says, right? All I can do is do whatever I can to bring beauty, hope, and healing to the world. And in doing so, my prayer and hope is that that's going to point people to the one that is beautiful, good, and true. So I think the story is actually a modern day parable or what the church should be doing in the world. Yes, we do live in a broken, fallen world. Man, it is a mess. We don't need to, recount all the stuff that's happening in the shifting culture, but it's kind of the best of times and the worst of times. I think oftentimes we focus on the worst while forgetting that we've got the best news, the good news of the gospel, which is beautiful. And what if we matched how we present that, how we package it, how we live our lives in a way that is artistic and beautiful, that actually is winsome, that opens people's hearts and minds?
you say that there was nothing beautiful about the cross except the power of sacrificial love. So,
Mm.
what is that paradox for us? How does that redefine what Christians mean when they talk about beauty? If you're leading a nonprofit, you know the tension. The mission's big, the budget's tight, and the work never slows down. But what if you could save 60 to 70% on hiring and still gain the skill, passion, and heart that drive your mission forward? Well, that's what Sidekick makes possible. They connect nonprofits with mission aligned virtual assistants, real humans bringing world class talent to your team for a fraction of the cost. Head to getyoursidekick.com/shiftingculture and book a call with JJ, a former executive director, who'll show you how hiring with Sidekick can multiply your mission and your impact.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of the cross is that out of brokenness, out of shame, out of darkness, God brings hope, healing, light. And I think that, again, is our calling, is to, again, somehow we have to, as Christians in today's world, somehow we got to get our eyes back on the hope of the gospel. As you begin to, it's kind of like Jesus says in Matthew 13, he says, "To you has been shown the mysteries of the kingdom. Blessed are your eyes that see and your ears that hear. For even the prophets long for this, but their eyes don't see and hear." And I think that there is a reawakening, if you will. I think we're in the midst of a renewal movement that I'm seeing and encountering all across the United States, where artists, Christians, patrons, churches are really beginning to open their hearts and their minds to how can they bring beauty into the world. I recently wrote a piece for Christianity Today for an article that'll come out, I think, this coming year on Renaissance or renewal, question mark. And it's kind of reflections on the state of the church in the arts or Christianity in the arts. And it's kind of like, I think we're in a renaissance of sorts, but more importantly, I think it's a renewal. And I think if we have eyes to see it, and this is what I mean, is I think oftentimes Christians, they're veiled to these realities that are God's actually raising up and doing beautiful things all around us if we only have eyes to see it. And if that can re-enliven the hope and the message of the gospel of how we share that to reach this new generation, man, I vote yes, and I wanna be a part of that movement. I wanna be a part of the movement that Jesus came to bring hope, light, and healing to the world. I wanna be a part of that, and I think this next generation, that's what they're hungry and they're longing for.
As you were at Asbury, I know that during the Asbury outpouring, there was a moment of for Creo Arts at the same time, and I think that might be reminiscent of what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
Is that there is a new renaissance and renewal, and out of that renewal, out of that outpouring, there comes like the arts as well. Can you just take us into some of that for you in the moment and just being a part of that? And then how did the arts emerge for you out of it?
I mean, it's a real personal, sacred moment for me in which I knew the Lord was calling me to start Creo Arts. We had applied for the nonprofit status. I didn't know how I was going to make this transition. I didn't know how I was going to leap from being the director of this program and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, the Asbury revival hit. And literally, the seminary and the university are side by side. And we got our IRS letter of approval during the first week of the Asbury revival. And I took that letter and laid it on the altar. And I said, "All right, Lord, this is yours. I am yours. I'm just a brush in your hands. I'm just and literally a few weeks after the revival, I had a guy who I'd just met called me up and said, "The Lord told me to pay your salary for a year. Take a step of faith." And literally in the last 3 years, it's been I've seen signs and wonders. I've seen unbelievable things of God's favor and blessings upon what he's doing in and through the arts. In close to 3 years, we've got I don't even know how many, we have like 5 staff members. We've got a gallery. We're working in 15 states with dozens of artists and churches from every denomination and background that are all kind of answering this call to bring beauty to their communities. And it looks different in different places, but there's the same heart for renewal, the same passion for reaching the next generation. So this isn't just a good idea for me. This isn't just a career shift. This is a serious sense of calling in which I'm all in. I mean, there's no backup plan. This is the thing, man.
I'm with you in it. I transitioned out of leading a missions organization the end of last year into doing this full time and wanting to bring the arts and creativity
Oh, wow.
to the world. And like, this is, I'm in. I don't know. I'm trusting God will provide for it. We'll see. But
Yeah, yeah.
this is, I do believe it is time for the artists to step up like this. I've just felt that shift and
Mm,
transition
yep.
personally in my life as well, and seeing what is happening around the world as
Yes.
artists and prophets are standing up in the
Yeah.
midst of,
Yep.
of this ugliness of the world, brokenness of the world, and bringing about beauty and renewal. You mentioned briefly that you think that there's a new renaissance. You think it's more of a renewal. Can you contrast it from back in the Renaissance period of what was happening
Yep.
into what do you think that God is doing through the arts today that's different than the Renaissance period in the past?
Yeah, again, you think of, like, the high Renaissance as, like, high art, and, integration into a lot of the funding of the art was integrated with, political governmental money it's high societal. But a real Renaissance as it takes root is broad. It affects every sector of society, and I think there are elements of that to this where there's again a renaissance within Christianity of once again re-engaging culture and saying we need to have good Christian thinkers involved in politics, science, in every sphere of society. And that absolutely includes the arts. It includes film, theater, all these expressions. And when we think of the Renaissance, the church was one of the major patron of the arts. And one of the cool things that I'm seeing is churches re-engaging the arts with budgets. Actually, commissioning this past year, I was commissioned to paint a prayer chapel in Los Angeles. Spent 4 weeks of my life, and I'm actually getting ready to fly back out in a few weeks to kind of they've commissioned me to do more work. So, another example is this same church, they did a major renovation, took their bell tower and turned it into a prayer chapel, and I went and painted these modern icons in there. It's, like, amazing, like, it was such a profound experience for me personally, and on the second visit, I was asking the pastor, like, "How could we partner with you to convert some of your space, reimagine and say?" We use the language of reimagining sacred space, helping churches see the property and their real estate, if you will. How can they use that for the arts? And so the church kinda owns a block, and it's not even a large church, they just acquired a significant property a number of years ago, and so he goes and gets a key. He says, "Man, I wanna show you something, like, we own a doctor's office right here that just shut down. What if we turned it into an arts center?" And so we walked through there, and what was cool was seeing the pastor dream. And he said, "What if we blew out this welcome area and turned this into a big gallery? And then the doctor-patient rooms, what if we turn those into art studios?" So, 1st of September, I flew out there for their grand opening of the Kibos Art Center, and it was amazing to see what this church has done over the course of the year. They've invested significant time and money into launching a community arts center to one, to engage the artists, to, create gallery space to where they can bring the arts, and then 3, how they can open up the space to invite the community in to experience the beauty of the arts, in a way that's redemptive and to create conversations and relationships with unchurched people. So this is just one example of a church that's in a Renaissance kind of way is patronizing the arts for the sake of the gospel. I mean, I could tell you, we've got a church we've worked with in Asheville. We helped them open an arts center in the arts district where 80% of artists lost all of their studios in the floods. I mean, there's just stories like this all across the US I could share.
I think some people, when they're thinking about the gospel, the good truth, they go, okay, reimagining a sacred space, reimagine these sacred spaces, bring about the arts, patron the arts. How in the world does that bring us to Christ? What does that look like? What is
Yep.
the gospel in the midst of the
Yeah.
arts?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So again, it's not bait and switch. It's one of the things is most churches are cloistered to the four walls of the church. And what happens statistically, what happens is when someone becomes a new believer and they join a church, discipleship is disengage from the world and do life within the four walls of this church. And over time, this is a statistical proven kind of, if you get into ethnographic research, is new believers have a network of non-believers that they're associated with. But they're quickly disengaged from that to only associate with Christians. And so what happens is over time, the vast majority of churches, the members no longer engage with non-believers. They no longer engaged with the world. They lose these outside connections. And so I think what the arts do, the arts recreate these connections. The arts are like a meal. They invite people around a table to what I've seen is if you host an art event, people will show up. Like, one of the biggest struggles the average church faces is how do we engage our community? How do we invite unchurched people to church? I think one of the lowest hanging fruit is to engage the arts. I used a threefold framework: guilds, galleries, gatherings. You know, use your building to start a guild or an artist community to begin to disciple artists. 2 is use building space for gallery space. And then 3 is like, now there's a lot more that goes into this, but 3 would be creating multi-worship arts events or creating quarterly, annual artist gatherings that invite the community in. So there's a lot of ways to have the arts as a means of grace that opens people to deep conversations around the gospel, and it actually lowers the bar for evangelism. It actually prepares people's hearts. It opens up conversations. And isn't that the thing that most Christians struggle with is how do you have a conversation with an unchurched person? How do I meet somebody who's not of faith? And I think the arts can help us kind of re-engage the world in a way that's thoughtful.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening and thank you for supporting the show. If you'd like to support the show and get early ad-free episodes, you go to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com. And with your subscription, you could have a private podcast feed in your podcast app where you get to download early episodes before anybody gets to listen to them. You could also support the show by going to the support the show link at the bottom of the show notes in the app that you're using right now. That goes to a page that supports the work my wife and I do around the world. That donation is also tax deductible. So if you want a tax deductible donation, you could go there. Or if you want to support the show by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps new listeners find the show as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you so much for supporting this work so that we could see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. I was talking last night. We have a woman in our church that she has an art show tonight, and she's showing a lot of her arts. She's speaking for like 30 minutes. She felt like the Lord said, "Don't plan, just follow the lead of my Spirit as you get up there and talk." And she was like, "Pray for me because I have a lot of unbelievers that are coming, and I want to present like, hey, there's like beauty of God in the midst of this art, but I don't want to like be dogmatic and truthful. Like I don't know how to talk about it in a way." And then she just talked about, and then she just went off for a little while about how when she paints, it is the only time when
Really?
she can block out the world. She feels a sense of peace and calm in the midst of creating more than she does any other time of her life. I was like, there you go. Like, you're leading. Like, what does it look like
Yeah.
to actually, in the midst of creation of art
Yep.
show up, find peace, find calm, be able to block out the world. That's where the beauty of her life is coming through. It's beautiful. But what will you say to somebody like that as they're
Yeah.
presenting something?
There's a chapter in there on art as spiritual discipline. And I think for artists, there's the whole creative process of like the co-creation when we create. There's like, I'm in my studio right now. This is like a home studio that we built. So I kind of took my leap of faith. We built this. But for the non-artists, if you will, there's all sorts of benefits of even viewing art. There's a book called Your Brain on Art that does all of the scientific research on the impact of the arts of just watching, just looking at art or engaging in an artistic thing like once a month will increase your lifespan. It will help your memory. Like there's all these, it's kind of like research of just walking among the trees, can like help lower your cortisone levels and, all these things. So I think, you know, sharing things, there's all sorts of ways that you could do this, having artists share their process, inviting artists and non-artists to experience artist talks. You could have Visio Divina nights where you have art and invite people to prayerfully reflect on the art. You could have, I mean, really, it's kind of endless. But one of the things I get into in that chapter on art as spiritual discipline is that the arts invite all of us to slow down, to look, and to listen, and then to respond. And I use this framework that actually C.S. Lewis, who's kind of the patron saint of like evangelicals and Protestants, in North America, where C.S. Lewis actually talks about how to view art. And it's really significant. So if you don't believe me, read the C.S. Lewis quote in there. And it's kind of like his thing of like, slowing down to look, to listen to what's happening through the art, and then to respond. And if you look at those through the eyes of faith and to prayerfully do that can be a really powerful experience. And again, for believers and non-believers, inviting them into a space of, we're all looking for more time. We're all looking for ways we're overstressed, we're overworked. And the arts remind us this power of slowing down and being present.
We're all made in the image of God. We all reflect who he is. And that means we're co-creators with him here. And so a lot of this being an artist, and you talk about missionaries of beauty, and you talk about people in the world, like we are agents of beauty and co-creators with God. How does this impact the everyday person that is not somebody that does painting or theater or film, well, what does the everyday person as artists look like?
It's funny, we have 3 daughters and they're all artists. Our 2 oldest daughters at Asbury University, they're art majors. Our 13-year-old is really a great artist as well. My wife jokes and says, "I feed the artists," And, I would say like the culinary arts are probably the most ancient form of human creation. Like sat around and thought about creating a fire and like, who came up with putting salt and pepper on your chicken or what, it's like humans have been creatively, doing things creative. Like how did humans figure out how to create fire? What was the need to like rub 2 sticks together and, create a spark? Like, so innovation and creativity in arts actually have been with us and around us since the very beginning, because again, God is the artist, the original artist. When he created Adam and Eve, he tasked them to name the animals. He didn't say this is the name of the animals. Part of their task is naming the animals. They're joining in a creative process. And I would argue that, and I do argue that, to be created in the Imago Dei is to not just be given moral capacity. Tolkien, I mean, many others have gotten in this, like the moral image actually connected to that is the ability to create and to appreciate beauty. Because again, there is one who is beautiful, good, and true. And we're created to co-create. And so I would say, whatever you do it artistically. put on lenses of creativity and innovation and dream a new dream. This is why so many people are just, just kind of stuck in their 9 to 5, and they're, a lot of us just feel like a cog in the wheel. What if God actually wanted us to, I've seen this with so many Christians. They're living their lives in a way that's very black and white. And I'm not even saying, gray lines. I'm talking about, I think the gospel invites us to live in living color. And I think our God is not a boring God, but you go in most churches and my goodness, like, talk about boring and drab and, like, monotonous, and God is a God of spontaneity, God is a God of beauty, God is a God of, like, I mean, the list could go on, right? So, I would just say whoever you are, whatever your vocation is, ask the Lord, how can I partner with you in the mission to bring beauty to the world? How can I make the gospel beautiful? How can I Again, this isn't watering it down. This is how do you live your life in a way that people want to actually emulate that? And they're like, "Man, whatever that guy's got, I want that." Whatever she's, whatever she's doing, there's something to the joy. I mean, the kids' coloring book, the probably the most popular Christian, artistic coloring thing is The Fruit of the Spirit. Like, that's the Spirit painting, working in our life in a way that's creativity that flows out of that. So whoever you are, whatever you're called to do it, bring beauty to the world is what I would say.
I grew up in, a variety of different churches, but they all look like, I don't know, like a Walmart. They
Yeah.
looked like a
Yep.
big old box, right?
Yes.
And there wasn't much. I remember going through, in my church history class, and we were just looking at the architecture of church
Yep.
buildings and how that beauty was trying to actually point us to
Yep.
God. And I was so struck and moved by it coming out of churches that actually look like, white boxes,
Yeah.
to see architecture that actually points me to God. And I was moved. In my church history professor kind of like dismissed churches like that because he's like, well, I mean, they're beauty on the outside, but there was no life on the inside. And I was like, well, okay, but the beauty is pointing me to God, and
Yeah.
I am moved by it. How do we start to reimagine even spaces in
Well,
churches to look
yeah, no, it's
more
good. I
beautiful?
again, this chapter, Steeples and Studios, when we look at the history of the church, you see that beauty has always been there. And I'd like to talk to your church history professor because you have that comes out of the overflow of something and from somewhere. And I would argue actually the opposite, that those historic, beautiful, ancient buildings, cathedral, these were built to point. I mean, the cathedral ceilings, they're so high that they're designed to lift your eyes toward heaven and to create an experience of transcendence. And what's interesting is I love visiting the cathedrals in Europe, and it's you go there, I mean, the people are walking around, they're mesmerized. These are non-believers. Now, many of these places now are, yes, kind of a tomb, but these at those times that the gospel was passed down through the generations. These sacred spaces were carriers of preserving the manuscripts that we take for granted today. There was good, bad. I mean, not to give you a history lesson, but there's great things that came out of the Reformation. There were bad. I mean, the Reformation just, took scissors and just cut out anything that, and boiled it down to, again, a church building that looks like a box, or, a lot of churches you go in and it looks like Walmart on the inside. And it's like, where's the beauty in this place? And I think we, we don't have to, I'm not advocating for building church buildings that look like cathedrals, but how do we integrate the arts? How do we begin to make beautiful, a theology of placemaking, a theology of place? What would it look like to reimagine sacred space in a way that engages the arts and prepares people's hearts to receive the gospel? That would be the question I would put to pastors, church leaders, Christians, to just begin to reimagine and prayerfully ask the Lord about those things. And there's like the church in LA is just one beautiful example of a small to mid-sized church that's actually investing money and resources and really engaging in a way that they want the arts to point people to Christ.
I mean, I remember, as I lived on the edge of the deserts, 5 miles from the Syrian border, hanging out with war refugees, ugliest place I've ever been in my life.
Mm.
And the thing, I mean, it was spiritually beautiful because Jesus was meeting people left and right. It was amazing. But the murals on the wall, painted by refugees and
Yeah.
others to bring beauty, always stopped people in their tracks in the midst of
Mm.
this ugly place. And it was the beauty on a dilapidated wall that actually pointed to what was needed in that moment was beauty, hope, transcendence
Yep.
in the midst of the ugliness and brokenness of life. Like, even in spots, not just murals on a wall, but how do we start to notice and recognize beauty in the world that's
Yeah.
already there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it begins in nature and creation. I think, my experience with, that, I tell the story of like, I hit the wall and that song, that piano concerto slowed me down. Well, I had long COVID, and beyond that, I mean, there was like a month I was just like walking around slow, and like, I was like an old man. And my wife had we've got a little flower, literally like a wildflower garden that's kind of a big circle that, has wildflowers that she sows the seeds every year. And I remember just looking at, just sitting there because I couldn't do anything else, just sitting there watching the bees and the butterflies, you know, pollinating these flowers and watching the sunflowers. There were 3 stages. They were kind of they were blooming, there was like the full bloom, and then there's beginning to die off, and then the birds are eating the seeds. And it was like you could see the life cycle. And it was like I saw the whole beauty of creation in a flower garden. And I think my encouragement is like we miss the miracles. We miss the small miracles that are every day all around, the beauty that is already there. So many people are focused on how bad their life is. What if we begin to look? And the other thing is, I had been going so fast and traveling the world doing all this stuff. And when I was laying in bed, I could hear my daughters running up and down the steps in the hallway. And my oldest was going to college. She was going to be a freshman. And I had this moment where I realized it was like I was missing their life. And it was like I was present, but was I present? I was always in the home in the evenings. And when I was here, we'd do stuff. But like, or, so many of us, we might be present to those we love, but our minds and our hearts are actually far off. How do we, and this is the power of the arts. I think art brings us back to the moment and can teach us to be present to the beauty that's already in our homes, in our life. It can free us from always having to go on to the next thing. So I would just encourage, like, go on a walk, go look at the flowers. When you see a bird, think of the miracle. One of the things I've started to do, and probably think I'm a little hokey, but I find bird feathers everywhere, almost daily. It's crazy. A couple months ago, it started, I was sitting outside my studio right here, reading my Bible, and a feather fell in my Bible while I was reading outside. And I just teared up. I was like, oh my gosh, like, what's going on with these feathers? And I joke and tell people it could either mean nothing or maybe it could mean everything. And what I mean by that is, what if God, you know, what if that's a little miracle that's actual? What if feathers are all around us every day and we just don't even see it? And so here's where I'm at is I'm looking for the little feathers. I'm looking for the flowers. I'm looking for if I see a butterfly stop, I'm stopping. I wanna see the beauty that's all around me, and I think that's the invitation for all of us is to slow down, to look, to listen. Again, Matthew 13, the mystery of the kingdom happens. We see it when we slow down to look, and we have eyes to see and ears to hear.
I know a lot of people who are listening to this, they have big dreams of bringing arts and beauty to the world in different places, like seeing, the brokenness of people transitioning out of prison into a new life, and trying to build a community around that. You have people like wanting to bring theater and the arts. I have big dreams. I have a dream in my heart that's been there for 20 years that I want to see something established, and it's like the arts. What would you say to people who have these dreams and saying it's there in your heart? You, as an apostolic artist,
Yeah.
how do you start and get things going?
Yep.
And even though, like there's this big dream out there, you can't get everything right away. You have to start small. How
Yep.
do you start to bring
Yeah.
beauty to the world?
It's a great question. One of my favorite quotes is Martin Luther King Jr. said, "You don't have to see the whole staircase. You got to take the first step." And, that is my encouragement is to invite us all to be a missionary of beauty and to reawaken dreams and visions that the Lord is maybe placed in your heart or others that are maybe listening. And I think God is an artist, God is a creator, and I think he delights when we co-create with him. So if we'll lay those dreams on the altar and take whatever steps and there's a whole process with this. I've taught church planning, but I teach people now how to think in terms of how to start local creative arts communities. And it looks different in different places. You always dream big, start small, you know, keep it, really put it before the Lord. I think give it the seriousness that it deserves. Oftentimes, I think Christian have dabbled in the arts and haven't really created for the glory of God. And there's a lot of, a lot of Christian artists are creating out of brokenness and bringing some dark stuff. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about bringing hope, healing, light, and it can be a source of our own healing as we kind of work those things out. But I think if we'll put them on the altar and we'll just start small, but dream big and ask the Lord, God, what are those next steps? That's part of the creative process. God, there's a little seed in there and you got to like water it and you got to till it. And the beautiful thing is like one day you look around, man, the gardens, God gave me this little seed of a vision for Creo Arts, and we're working in like 15 states, and it is beautiful to see what the Lord has done.
What's your hope for how beauty will save the world? What do you hope the readers will get?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly that. I hope that every reader will be inspired to make their life a work of art, whether they're an artist or not, whether they're a pastor, whether they're a painter, whether they're a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, whether they're a stay-at-home mom, whatever you do, bring beauty to the world through your life. Slow down, see beauty all around you, and then bring beauty to the world, whatever you do, and begin to dream with God. And let's let's bring beauty to the world because ultimately, I believe it points to the one who's beautiful, good, and true. And I think my other desire, which is directly connected to that, is that there will be a renewal within the church that will flow out of that renaissance and renewal, that we will see the church re-engage. As it re-engages beauty and arts, it will re-engage culture. And we'll see an overflow, just like I saw it at the Asbury revival or Asbury outpouring, as many people called it, is just this overflow of miracles of hope and joy and beauty and light. And who wouldn't want more of that? It's like, come on. I know I'm preaching to the choir to you, but like, let's let's bring beauty to the world. And I would just say, why not? Call me a dreamer, man, but I'm all in. That's People say, "What's Winfield Bevins doing?" He's painting in his art studio and he's planting flowers and bringing beauty to the world.
Amen. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. A couple of quick questions here at the end. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I would advise myself to what's interesting is, last week I visited my university for the first time in over 20 years, Lee University, where I met my wife. It's funny, we drove by, took a picture in front of the dorm where I met her, and, there's not a lot I would do over again, but I would kinda reflecting on that, man, I would take myself less serious, and I would take God more serious, and I would have trusted the Lord a little more and just lightened up, and yeah, I think just oftentimes the stuff we stress out about, and I'm, again, preaching to myself here even today, is like, God really is in control. God really is guiding our steps if we really fully surrender ourselves. And God has always been good. And God, even in the bad, God has always gone before and has always made a way. And why wouldn't I trust him? And so I think I would have if I could take anything back, I would have worried less and trusted more in God's grace and his love for me.
That's great. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
I did just read, C.S. Lewis's Surprised by Joy, which was
Hmm.
a lovely book. It took a little while. Once you kinda get into it, it was really lovely and it's kinda similar. He talks about these glimmers of joy throughout his life. He's saying the same thing I'm saying about beauty, and it's all interconnected, and it's not something different because he's talking about the imagination and how he got into fairy stories and these different things, and you see, one of the most highly creative kind of lay theologians, C.S. Lewis. It's a great book and would be a great book for some of the listeners to just kinda get a different perspective of what we're talking about today.
Well, How Beauty Will Save the World will be out anywhere books are sold, and you can go and get that fantastic book. It'll make your spirit come alive, as it did mine, and it just like my heart just like, hey, I'm coming alive reading this thing. So yeah, really wonderful, wonderful book. How can people where would you like to point people to either get the book, to connect with you, Creo Arts, what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is, I'm also an artist. We didn't even get into that, but, my website's winfieldbevins.com. Creoarts.org is where you can kinda learn about this national nonprofit that I lead, how artists, churches, patrons can kind of engage the arts in their local communities. We have tons of films of capturing artists working in their studios from different backgrounds. There's a book page on that site. As you said, the books wherever books are sold. Instagram is probably the kind of place where I'm kind of doing most of my stuff, where you could see my personal artwork but yeah, I'm pretty active as people reach out and just again, I hope that our time today would just inspire others to whoever you are, whatever you do, bring beauty to the world, make your life a work of art, and let's be missionaries of beauty.
Amen. Well, thank you, Winfield. It was a fantastic conversation. And yes, let us be missionaries of beauty, and we could bring beauty to the world. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out, share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.